Hello, this is Dr. Eric Bricker, and thank you for watching A Healthcare Z. Today's topic is Dr. Robert Lustig's book, Hacking of the American Mind. Now, Dr. Robert Lustig is a pediatric neuroendocrinologist from the University of California at San Francisco, UCSF, one of the most preeminent medical facilities and research hospitals in the world. And he has written this book. He's written many books about the ills, or many literature, articles, research, etc., about the ills of the processed food and the sugar industries. And he wrote this book specifically about how corporations, this is sort of my tongue-in-cheek title for his book. Another name for his book would be How Corporate Predators Use Brain Chemistry to Increase Profits While Harming the American people's health, and really the world's people's health. Now, the book goes into fascinating detail about brain chemistry in a very actual easy to understand way. And I'm just going to give you the Cliff's Notes version of that now. So, in our brains we have dopamine, and that is the neurotransmitter chemical that's responsible for pleasure or euphoria. It is the chemical associated with rewards in our brain. And what that does is, if you look at this small graph here, if you have mood on the y-axis and time here on the x-axis, that you would have this certain baseline level of mood, and then when you get that hit of dopamine in your brain, it improves your mood when you feel the euphoria or the pleasure, what have you. But then it's short-lived and it drops you back down to a mood level that was actually lower than the original mood level. So what do? You crave even more dopamine, and because you develop tolerance, it requires more dopamine to actually get up to the same level of pleasure or euphoria that you had before. And so it becomes this vicious cycle. But he then contrasts that with a neurotransmitter, serotonin, which has a completely different effect on the brain. And that is, serotonin is the neurotransmitter associated with contentment, or peace, or calm. And so there you can think of it as sort of this steady amount of mood, or steady level of mood. And yes, it fluctuates a little bit, and some people have higher sort of baseline levels of contentment, and some people have lower baseline levels of contentment, and that's associated with the presence of the chemical serotonin in our brains. Now let's go through specifically what stimulates each of these chemicals. So, DA, which is the abbreviation for dopamine, is released in the brain when we consume sugar, caffeine, alcohol, nicotine, illicit drugs like cocaine and heroin, prescription narcotics like oxycodone. It also comes from behaviors, from things like using social media like Facebook, from gambling, and from sex. So the food and beverage industry with the sugar and the caffeine, the alcohol industry, the tobacco industry, the illicit drug trade, the prescription, pharma, and the physician pill mills that would prescribe the big pharma prescription narcotics, social media, whether it be Facebook or Instagram, Twitter, what have you, gambling with casinos, anything related to the sex industry. And so here you have all of these corporate interests who know and understand exactly how dopamine works in our brains. And they have specifically engineered their products to create this feedback loop of wanting and needing and craving their product even more. And one of his prime examples of that is how the food and beverage industry has specifically added more sugar and more high fructose corn syrup ever since the 1970s into our diet. Before the mid-1970s, we consumed zero high fructose corn syrup. And now it is gobs and gobs more than we ever did even in the 80s. So here you have an industry that specifically designed its product to make it addictive. Okay, now, same thing with serotonin. How do we get serotonin? We actually get it from protein, and it's a specific amino acid in protein, tryptophane, which you are probably familiar with. Now, it also comes from behaviors. Serotonin is released in our brains through relationships, through our friends, and through our family, and through meaningful relationships with our coworkers. It's released in our brain through service and volunteering and giving of yourself to others. It's released in your brain through prayer and meditation. And so, guess what? When you engage in dopamine stimulating activities, it actually inhibits serotonin. The more pleasure and euphoria we seek, the less peace and calm biochemically our brains are capable of achieving. And I will add a third chemical on top of that, and that is the chemical cortisol, the stress hormone. Now, many people in America are very stressed out. What does that do? That lowers the mood level that we have here, and it lowers the mood level that we have here, such that we crave even more dopamine stimulating substances and activities in order to make up for the lower mood that's caused by the higher levels of cortisol from stress and sleep deprivation, which then inhibits the serotonin, which again lowers our overall level of contentment and peace. And Robert Lustig says this is biologically definable within our brains. This is chemically defined within our brains, and it is known by corporations, and it is used as a mechanism for profit. Specifically, I can remember the Chamath P., I can't pronounce his last name, an early employee at Facebook. He went on CNBC, and I will leave a link to this in the show notes, where he specifically said, look, we knew that when people posted pictures on Facebook and then they saw that it got a like, we knew that stimulated dopamine in their brain, and that would cause them to come back to that post over and over and over again to see the more thumbs up, because every time they saw a thumbs up, it would stimulate dopamine in their brain. They would get a little hit, and they would need to come back for more. So then they would post another picture, get a hit, get a thumb, drop back down, come back for more. Facebook intentionally exploited the biochemistry of our brains to get us to use their app and sell us more ads. And Chamath P. admits exactly that. Now, what in the world is so fine, so they do this. Who cares? Well, the problem is, who cares is that it totally kills your health. It literally eats you alive from the inside slowly. It cooks you from the inside. So while these corporations are making more money, we as Americans are becoming more obese. We're having more metabolic syndrome, which then increases our risk for cancer and cardiovascular disease and diabetes. Literally, these dopaminergic pathways in our brain decrease our cognitive ability. They literally make us dumber, and they damage our hippocampus and make our memories worse. They lead to addiction. The pleasure-reward pathway is an addictive pathway by definition, and they increase depression. And if you add up all of the healthcare costs associated with the diseases that are caused by the hacking of the American brain by corporations in the name of profit, it adds up to 75% of all illness of the $4 trillion U.S. healthcare system is from the diseases caused by the hacking of the American brain. That is Dr. Robert Lustig's premise in this book. So, what is public health enemy number one? To a certain extent, corporations in America might just be one of the worst public health threats that we have. And we don't even know it because we're too busy looking for a dopamine fix. Now, Dr. Robert Lustig goes into ways that we can actually decrease and just break out of the cycle of the dopamine high and increase serotonin to increase contentment and peace. That is beyond the scope of today's video. But just to be aware that this is happening and this is being done intentionally to us is a very important thing for all of us in healthcare finance to understand. And that's my point for today. Thank you for watching A Healthcare Z.